Hello and welcome to the virtual launch of the second edition of The Way Ahead, a resource to support former family carers. This will be a video of approximately 15 minutes long that will detail the various contents and the audience for this booklet. Later, we will be also sharing a much shorter 2-minute video that summarizes this booklet. So without further ado, I will bring you up the PDF version of the booklet as it's a virtual launch. That's the nature of it. Currently, we do have 5,000 copies of this booklet, and just to say, already 1,000 have been distributed to Family Carers Ireland and 1,000 have been distributed to the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland. So we're keen that the other 3,000 are distributed across the country to former family carers, to organisations that are members of Care Alliance, to not-for-profits, to HSE centres, to citizen information centres, and to family resource centres. If you want to get a copy of this, or indeed numerous copies of this, we will have details at the end of this video explaining how to get these copies. So, this booklet is very much aimed at people whose caring has ended. Before we go into detail of that, I just want to acknowledge the support from National Lottery, Family Carers Ireland and the Alzheimer's Society, who supported the publication of this booklet, also the design of Ruth, and the team of people who put the contents together. Too numerous to mention there, but it's a real cross-section of people, current carers, former carers, people, health and social care professionals involved in the not-for-profit sector and the statutory and HSE services. Also want to acknowledge the content that we have taken from some publications outside of Ireland, and indeed the details are there of how you can download this resource from our website, carealliance.ie. So there's a quick table of contents that I'll leave up on the screen for a moment, and then I will proceed to go into detail about the various sections. So, Section 1, who is this booklet aimed at? And it is people who provided unpaid physical or social care to a family member with an illness or disability in the home for a prolonged period of time. Loosely termed, described as a family carer. Not everyone identifies with caring, particularly in the early part of their role, and eventually perhaps they hear the term carer or family care, oh, that's me. But in many ways, it's people just caring for relatives, an aging relative. And we know that people's caring can go on for years. On average, it's about 3 or 4 years, but that's only the average. For some, it's much longer, or indeed much shorter period of time. As a group, we decided that this resource wasn't aimed at people whose caring continues, albeit in a different format. And I guess what we mean by that is people perhaps who are being cared for in nursing homes or other residential units. We appreciate those people are continuing to care, albeit in a different way, in a different intensity and a different format. There are some resources available for such people, and we're directing people to Family Carers Ireland, the Alzheimer's Society, a couple of other online resources that are very much focused about continuing to care for someone with dementia, although they may well be in a nursing home. We're also very conscious of minority carers and those who, through their caring and indeed post-caring, where it can be difficult for them to be acknowledged for the care they've provided, or indeed in the past. And we're specifically talking about people from the lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender community. And we detail that more later throughout the document. Firstly, I suppose we want to acknowledge that the impact of caring can have on people's well-being. It's not all negative. People will often say it's brought them closer together with the person they care for, but we also know that caring can be challenging, and sometimes when the relationship has been difficult to start with, the evidence is that the caring can be more difficult. So we just want to acknowledge that, and thankfully we've my colleague Zoe, who's written an article around some of those topics. The link is there. There's also been some research undertaken trying to understand that journey of caring, people's pre-caring world, when they didn't have any caring responsibilities. Then they move into this caring world, and then ideally they come out, in a sense, after the caring is ended. And I suppose sometimes people are in between there, and they, as the literature suggests, caught between worlds. And the reality is it can take time to adjust to the end of someone's caring role. The reality is often people's health stays reasonably robust while they're caring, but there comes a time, sometimes through the exhaustion, through age, just through anxiety, that their health impact materializes and manifests itself sometimes after their caring has ended. So in terms of statistics, we know currently there's about 390,000 people providing unpaid care to members across Ireland. We also know that about 60 to 70,000 people's caring ends in any given year. And the source of that is some data that we've extrapolated from the UK context. I think that's a nice quote there. So this booklet is, I suppose, helped you through this difficult time after you ended your role as a carer, give you an idea of what you can expect, and try and point out some of the services that may be available. We also have a number of quotes and short videos that people can link onto. There's some practical resources available around registering a death, bereavement counselling, finance and wills, returning to work, retraining, and filling the void left by the end of the caring journey, or caring role. And many former carers will talk about that void in their lives. The public health nurse no longer calls immediately after the death. There may be many commiserations and sympathies, but soon after, the phone stops ringing, as someone said to me. We also try to highlight the skills that a carer may have developed while they were caring, and what they may offer to an employer if they're going to volunteer, or in their overall aspects of their lives. Fair bit of the early part of this booklet details some of the bereavement services, the grief process, and we're conscious there's a lot of resources out there in terms of grieving, and we do direct people to that near the end of the booklet. Other than to say grief takes time and people's grief can be different. There's a nice link there from the Irish Hospice Foundation around a talk on grief. We talk about some of the various experiences of grief, the feelings, the physical, the thoughts, and how long does grieving take. And for many, grieving, indeed for everyone, grieving is a natural process, and for many they will go through that journey. For some, they can get stuck in grieving, and that's sometimes where accessing specific bereavement services is recommended. And that's this issue of when to look for extra help. I suppose that's when people are challenged by the grieving and they're not moving on through that. And we talk later about the specific services available. There's this concept of a pyramid of bereavement supports. At level 1, people get general support and information, and that suffices their needs. For some, they need extra support, which is level 2. And then for a small cohort, they may benefit from intense therapeutic support in terms of counselling. So we talk here about caring for yourself post-caring, and some of the losses you're likely to experience, not just the identity, but also the close bond you may have had, the relationships with healthcare professionals, the loss of income supports. We know that people in receipt of carers allowance can continue to receive carers allowance for 12 weeks, but then the expectation is that they seek looking for work, or perhaps revert to another income support measure. We also know the chance of returning to the workforce, and we'll come back to that later a little bit more. Talk about health and well-being, being kind to yourself, and I suppose be informed. We know Family Carers Ireland have specific events for former carers and are available throughout the country to support former carers. It's always good to talk to someone you trust. And we've some, I suppose, tips that we have found useful and others have found useful in terms of getting through your grieving process. Sometimes it's important to talk to a GP if you've ignored health conditions while you were caring. Now is maybe the time to do that. And indeed, if your level of anxiety, your mood, you're perhaps relying on alcohol or those other substances, important maybe to have conversation with your GP, because you do have to look after your emotional well-being. We talk about anxiety and depression. We do know that carers do live with a lot of anxiety and depression, and that doesn't necessarily get worse or better when their caring ends, but it can be present for many of them. We detail here some of the supports Family Carers Ireland can provide for those whose caring is ended. And here we also talk about some of the books that have been published where people describe their caring. One by Audrey Jenkinson of Past Caring, and another booklet by Helen MacDonald. We were privileged and lucky to have a number of people in Cork whose caring is ended to provide short videos on reflecting on the caring they provided. So thank you to those who provide those, and those links there. Click into the links and you'll get the videos. Section 7 talks a little bit about finance, the 12-week rule where you can continue to receive carers allowance. We know that not everyone would have been in receipt of care allowance or very conscious of that, but for those who were, the process of that moving on to either another income support payment or indeed back to work or a pension or the likes. There's some other links and resources there in terms of citizen information, the Revenue Commissioner's money advice and budgeting service. Section 8 talks a little bit about wills and legal advice, registering a debt. And section 9, I suppose, looks about, well, what to do next? Where do I go with my life, my work, my friendships, and maybe anything associated with the person you've been caring for. Some nice quotes there we've got from former carers. Section 10 talks about returning to work. Again, for some, they may be of an age that they're not required or don't need to be or want to be going back to paid work. For many others, they may be still in their prime and need and indeed want to go back to work. We also know that many carers will have continued to care throughout the caring journey, or should I say continue to be in part-time paid work. So for those, this section may not be as relevant. But what we do want to, I suppose, highlight is the skills that so many carers have developed while they've been caring. And sometimes they aren't aware of them. And we've some skills here, and I think it's really important to highlight these, that people have developed in their caring role: financial management, negotiation, advocacy, and all those important skills, and how they're important they are and valuable for a potential employer. This is, I suppose, a little light-hearted way of looking at a vacancy as a carer and the skills you require. And I suppose what for me it tells us is that for many carers, they're bringing to an employer a real collection of skill sets and a really strong CV, even if they don't feel like that at the time. Again, so, a former carer put this together and I suppose jokes about the skills that they don't have. Oh, none, I've only been a carer. And in fact, they do have so many skills. I've had to manage the care of the person they've been caring for. The in-trail centres do have a level of support for helping people return to the labour force, the paid labour force, and there's a link there. And section 11 looks about retraining and study. For many people may have put on pause their career, their education, their training, and now is maybe the time for them to go back and do some courses. Living through this COVID situation, for so many courses are online, and it's been a real boost to the online, I suppose, education piece. There's education training boards, there's AINTUS, also NALA for people perhaps who have some literacy challenges. Qualifax pulls together the database of all third level courses available in Ireland. And then internationally, there's what's called massive open online courses. People can pick a short topic in anything, philosophy, science, you name it, and they're often free. So we'd encourage people to look at those. Section 12 looks at volunteering, and for many carers, they're so giving in their own right that sometimes post-caring they want to give back. For some, that can be offering peer support to current or former carers. For others, it can be volunteering in something that's nothing to do with caring because it's been so difficult and arguably traumatic for them. In our own board of directors, there's a number of former carers, and that's the way they volunteer. And family carers can be both advocates, or former carers can be wonderful advocates and champions of carers issues, and we see that in the media regularly. We detail how you might want to volunteer, some of the hoops perhaps you might want to jump through or have to jump through, although there's not that many. The Volunteer Ireland website. Board Match is for people who want to put themselves forward to be volunteers on a board of directors of a not-for-profit, and many organisations are really seeking the skills and experience of former carers to inform the work they do to support their clients. So that's Board Match and Volunteer Ireland. Small piece section there around what the research tells us around former carers and their needs. And finally, section 14 lists some of the resources that we alluded to earlier. There's a bereavement guide from the Citizens Information, which is very helpful. There's a number of websites, support networks, counselling, online support, which has become more and more important. For those who are in receipt of the medical card, you can access free counselling through primary care teams, so be sure to seek that out. I know Family Carers Ireland have recently announced they're in a position to offer counselling to family carers, and I understand that also includes those whose caring has ended recently. And that brings us to the end of the resource. So guys, thanks for listening to this. And we look forward to people across Ireland benefiting from this new resource. And as I said, the details of how to order this are available at the end of this video. Thank you.